So you heard the scripture. The first point I'd like to make about this passage is that there was an intentional purpose in telling this story. And that purpose was to establish Peter as the apostle who had authority over all others. Early in the tradition, we see the disciples begin jockeying for position. And so in the Gospels and Acts and the epistles, whenever one of the disciples is named as witness to the resurrection of Jesus or is depicted performing miracles, the underlying goal has to do with leadership in the very early church. And as the house churches grew and Christian Judaism spread, so did the competition, because there was power to be brokered. Never mind that this was the exact opposite of what Jesus had taught and demonstrated. And from here I could go on and on, but I've been there and done that from this very pulpit, so I'm not going there today. On this Mother's Day, I'm not so much interested in Peter as I am in teasing out the importance of the women of Tabitha in this story. First of all, Tabitha was named. That is significant. There are lots of women and other people in the Bible who are simply unnamed. Tabitha was named. And the other women were included as well. They remained unnamed, but they were included. They were considered disciples. They were devoted to good works and to charity. This is an indication that these women, the widows, were such a strong presence in the oral tradition that the memory could not be discarded when it came to preserving the story for the actual written record. I want you to remember this. The story was so strong that it could not be discarded. Remember this whenever women in the Bible are named. Likewise, I want you to notice when people in the Bible are not named. Those kinds of silences and absences can be disturbing, but Scripture that is unsettling and disturbing compels us to move beyond the simple, apparent meanings and go deep below the surface to the hidden stories. One biblical scholar has written that such stories are dangerous memories because they're acts of subversion of authority and the dominant paradigm. By interpreting Scripture stories from underneath, from the perspective of those who are not part of the dominant group, the ruling elite, the religious authorities, but rather from the perspective of the powerless, we find hope and liberation and the Scriptures rather than enforcing or reinforcing that oppression. Now, the epistles increasingly denigrated women's participation in ministry. You may recall that one of the epistles inveighed against listening to old wives' tales. Well, there must have been old wives telling tales, or they wouldn't have been talking about that. And then also, in the epistles, women are supposed to remain silent in church. I'm glad we got over that. And as the church developed and became hopelessly patriarchal and women became second-class citizens at best, stories such as this one about Tabitha have offered hope to women who know the pain of marginalization and dismissal. And there are a number of women's stories throughout Scripture, from Miriam in Exodus to the Samaritan woman at the well, to Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of Jesus, and to the many women who were ministers like Tabitha in the early Jesus movement. These dangerous memories survive. And when we share these stories, we're remembering these women despite their denigration and subjugation. We're memorializing women whose love endured, regardless of their low positions. And we're honoring women whose faith nurtures our own. Now, I've been speaking of women's stories, but we can name other individuals and groups as well that routinely face exclusion, condemnation, deportation, cruelty, and violence because they aren't the right color, or the right ethnicity, or the right citizenship, or the right sexual orientation, or the right gender identity, or the right social class, or the right religion, or the right billionaire. Folks whose stories have been suppressed or lost altogether. Think about how many people through history have been unnamed, as though their lives didn't matter, as though they weren't entitled to their dignity as human beings made in the likeness of God, unconditionally loved by God. So many stories have been lost. Now, because women and other marginalized groups have been of little worth in their societies, there have always been those who preferred that their stories be lost and forgotten. Even today, stories are intentionally eliminated. Names are being erased. Books by and about marginalized folks are removed from libraries and banned from schools. From Bible stories to slave narratives, to civil rights movement, to critical race theory, to labor movements, to Stonewall, to the current demonstrations on campuses and towns and cities across the country, throughout the history of social justice movements. We owe it to them to tell their stories and to name those whose names we can remember or find out as we dig through history. Because stories and memories can offer life if we listen deeply. We must tell those stories and retell those stories. Telling their stories honors folks who helped build a better world. Now, this may not seem too important. It's a seemingly small act. Simply sharing a story and keeping a memory alive can encourage our spirits and strengthen our hearts. In fact, story and memory are what the biblical witness is all about. Stories and memories of people's encounters with the experience of the living God. Now, likewise, for us, there's wisdom and power in living a reflective life, of making meaning and interpreting our own experiences, of composing our own stories and nurturing our own memories. Too often, we allow ourselves to be so distracted by everyday busyness, not to mention technology, that we lose track of who we are. We lose our story. We lose the thread of God consciousness throughout our lives. Our moments of awareness of the presence of God are often momentary and infrequent at best. But upon reflection and in telling our stories, we can discover our encounters with divine mystery. So let me circle back to Mother's Day, after all. Mothering love is the fiercest kind of love. It's about pouring body, breath, and even blood into our families and communities. And of course, this calls for celebration. And I believe that mothering is a capacity that resides in each of us. It's not a biological destiny, nor is it confined just to the home. Each of us has the ability to mother others and to mother ourselves, to love, nurture, nourish, raise up, and set free. And an important part of that mothering is sharing our stories, telling our own, or listening deeply to others. listening to stories helps us make meaning of life. Sometimes we don't tell our stories. We silence ourselves, or we allow others to silence us. But in that silence is suffering and alienation. When we take heart and gain the courage to speak our truth to one another, we hear each other into speech, and we speak ourselves into life. Our stories become powerful tools of mothering and transformation and liberation and empowerment. Today we need that more than ever. Now, on a personal level, an individual level, I would ask, what are the stories and the memories that sustain you? Now, for example, whenever my daughters and I are together, we tell stories about my mother. While driving or shopping or listening to music, we nearly always comment on something that my mother would have liked or enjoyed. And although she's passed, when we invoke these stories, her presence is again vividly known, and her love still surrounding us. I wonder, who has mothered you? I wonder, what are the stories and memories that sustain and nurture you? And if Mother's Day brings you grief or anger or longing for what might have been, I encourage you to search your story for folks who have mothered you in loving ways. An aunt, a mentor, a caregiver, a friend, yourself. Our stories mother us. And so I invite you to remember your story and the stories of your loved ones. Tell them often, and offer the gift of life by listening to the stories of others. Hold space for one another. Honor one another, so the stories and memories can be kept alive to nurture and sustain us and give us hope. Dear friends, may your stories sustain you and give you